You see, my friends, what we often call love is, in truth, an ancient echo, a repetition of something unresolved, an inner theater that plays the same performance until we awaken in the middle of it. We meet someone and we say, this feels familiar, and we think it is fate, that we have found a kindred spirit, but so often that familiarity is not the resonance of souls meeting anew. It is the echo of an old wound, disguised as belonging. It is the psyche's cruel and beautiful tendency to recreate what it could not heal. And until you see that, you will call it destiny, when in fact it is the unconscious seeking completion. When I say it wasn't attachment, it was familiar pain, I mean that the feeling of home you discovered in another person was the home of your old suffering. You mistook the ache for affection, because both carried the same vibration from the past, somewhere in your childhood, or even deeper in the ancestral psyche, in the collective inheritance of your family. A certain kind of pain became associated with love. Perhaps love was always mixed with absence, or warmth with rejection, or attention with fear. The child learns this code and calls it connection. Later, the adult replays it, hoping to finally change the ending. This is how the unconscious works. It is not logical. It is mythic. It will summon a person into your life who resembles, in soul texture, the one who first wounded you, and you will be drawn to them, not because they are right, but because they are familiar. The psyche prefers the known misery to the unknown peace. For peace feels foreign. It feels too still, too unearned. The nervous system that has adapted to chaos finds calm intolerable. So it seeks again the trembling edge of old emotion, the ancient vibration of what once broke it, thinking, if I can love this one right, perhaps this time I will not be abandoned. Perhaps this time the parent within will stay. Oh, but what happens, my friends, when you discover that this cycle is not love at all, but the compulsion of the wound itself? What happens when you awaken in the middle of the repetition and see the strings of the puppet theater? At first, there is despair. The illusion collapses. You realize that what you called home was the same room of suffering, just rearranged. But beyond that, despair lies liberation, for consciousness begins precisely where repetition ends. The moment you can see the pattern, you are no longer wholly possessed by it. This is the fundamental work of individuation, to withdraw the projections that keep you trapped in old stories. When you can say, this is not my lover who abandons me, but my own inner mother who was once distant, you have taken a step toward freedom. When you can say, this rage is not truly against the other, but against the helplessness I felt as a child, you begin to integrate the shadow. The outer conflict is always the mirror of an inner opposition. You do not fall in love with a person, you fall into relationship with your own unconscious through them. We imagine the other as the redeemer of our pain, but in truth, they are the instrument through which our pain becomes visible. They awaken what was sleeping. The beloved is a mirror that reveals not what you want, but what you have forgotten within yourself. The one who abandons you shows you your own abandoned inner child. The one who controls you reflects the tyrant you have internalized. The one who withholds affection confronts you with your own inability to nourish yourself. Every bond is an alchemical vessel where the psyche seeks transformation through friction, through suffering, through recognition. When you understand this, love ceases to be a desperate demand and becomes a sacred mirror. Then the question is not, why did they hurt me? But what archetype in me was calling for this experience? Perhaps the anima, the inner feminine, longs to be seen, or the animus, the inner masculine, seeks strength through confrontation. Perhaps your inner child cries for reparenting. Perhaps your shadow desires to step into light. Love, you see, is the stage upon which the soul enacts its dramas. It is a psychic theater more than a romance. Every relationship is an initiation. I once said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. The same is true of your attachments. You will repeat the same heartbreak, the same betrayal, the same abandonment, until you recognize the pattern as your own creation. The psyche repeats not to punish, but to heal. The wound wants to be seen. The moment you turn your gaze inward, the repetition loses its power, for what was once an unconscious compulsion becomes a conscious choice. And yet, consciousness does not come easily. The ego resists illumination. It fears the death that self-knowledge brings. For to see clearly is to dismantle the illusions that comforted us. When you realize that your attachment was only familiar pain, you lose not only the illusion of love, but the identity built around suffering. Who are you when you are no longer the one chasing the unavailable, the one fixing the broken, the one saving the distant? This is the crisis of transformation, when the old identity dies and the new one has not yet been born. It is in that dark night of the soul that individuation truly begins. There, stripped of illusions, you face the raw self, naked, trembling, uncertain. You must descend into the underworld of your psyche, as Orpheus descended for Eurydice. You must confront the shadow that has followed you, the neglected archetypes that cry out for recognition. And in that descent, you realize you were never truly seeking another person. You were seeking reunion with your own soul. The child who was unloved creates an inner mythology. If I am perfect, they will love me. If I give enough, they will stay. And so, as an adult, you choose partners who activate that same impossible task. You replay the myth to complete it, but love cannot heal what consciousness denies. Only by facing the truth that your attachment was a mirror of old pain, can you begin to free the child within from its endless rehearsal. You must sit with that child. You must say, you no longer need to earn love by suffering. You no longer need to call pain home. This is how the alchemy begins when compassion replaces compulsion. Healing does not mean forgetting. It means learning to see with new eyes. The memories remain, but they lose their poison. The familiar pain no longer seduces you because you have learned its language. The psyche, when unhealed, confuses intensity with intimacy. It mistakes anxiety for passion. But when you have healed, love feels different. It is calm, steady, untheatrical. To the unhealed heart, such peace feels boring, lifeless, because it does not match the rhythm of trauma. But to the awakened soul, peace is ecstasy. The stillness of true love is unbearable until you have learned to rest in yourself. And what does it mean to rest in yourself? It means that you have become both father and mother to your inner being, that you no longer seek externally what you have found internally. It means that you can hold your pain with tenderness without projecting it onto another. This is what I call wholeness, the union of opposites within the psyche. The masculine protects the feminine. The conscious holds the unconscious, and the ego serves the self. Then love becomes a dance between two whole beings, not a negotiation between two wounds. Do you understand, my friends, that the journey from attachment to love is the journey from repetition to revelation? The psyche replays the familiar not to torment you, but to awaken you. The pain that returns is a messenger saying, look here, this is where you are still asleep. You may hate it, you may resist it, but it is the teacher that never leaves until you learn. The moment you honor it, it softens. For the soul does not punish, it educates. There are moments when you will think you are regressing, when the same emotions flood you again, when the same kind of person appears at your door. But remember, repetition is not failure if it brings awareness. The same pattern at a higher level of consciousness becomes a spiral, not a circle. You are not starting over. You are deepening the lesson. Each encounter becomes more transparent. Each emotion more intelligible. This is how the psyche unfolds. Its wisdom not in straight lines, but in spirals of return. Every dream you have ever dreamed about rejection, about being unseen, about trying to speak and no one hearing, these are the soul's ways of dramatizing the ancient wound. Dreams speak the language of the symbolic, not the literal. When you dream of a closed door, you are not dreaming of your lover's door, but of the barrier within your own heart. When you dream of running endlessly, you are fleeing from the part of yourself that wants to rest. When you dream of drowning, it is the unconscious calling you to surrender. The familiar pain becomes a dream that repeats itself until you awaken inside it. Then the dream dissolves and the psyche exhales. The ancients understood this better than we do. They created myths not as entertainment, but as maps of the inner world. When Sisyphus rolled his stone, he was enacting the same repetition we live when we chase the unavailable. When Narcissus fell in love with his reflection, he was illustrating the ego's infatuation with its own wounds. And when Persephone was abducted into the underworld, it was the soul's descent into the unconscious, the necessary journey toward rebirth. These are not stories about gods. They are stories about us. We are mythic beings living psychological dramas. Therefore, when you find yourself drawn again to what hurts you, do not judge. Observe. Ask, what archetype is speaking through this attraction? Perhaps it is the wounded healer, the one who can only love through saving. Perhaps it is the orphan who feels at home only in longing. Perhaps it is the lover who fears annihilation in intimacy. Each has its own language, its own mythology. To know them is to know yourself, and yet knowing is not enough. You must live the knowing. You must act differently, feel differently, risk differently. Insight without embodiment is mere philosophy. The alchemical fire of transformation requires experience. It is not enough to understand your childhood. You must nurture the inner child. It is not enough to name the pattern. You must stay conscious when the familiar beckons. This is the work of a lifetime, for even the most awakened among us fall back into old dreams when tired or lonely. But the difference is awareness. We return more quickly. We forgive ourselves more gently. We learn to see even the relapse as part of the dance. You see, the psyche is not cruel in its repetition. It is precise. It does not choose at random who will appear in your life. The figures that enter your path are living symbols, embodied metaphors of what lies unhealed within you. They come not to satisfy desire, but to stir remembrance. The unconscious has only one aim, to make you whole. It will sacrifice comfort for the sake of completion. It will bring into your life those who wound you just enough to awaken you. It will place you before mirrors you cannot avoid, so that you might finally meet the stranger you have always been, the stranger within you that is the shadow, the disowned self, the one who carries all the pain you refuse to feel. When you fall in love, the shadow often walks in before you do. It wears the face of the beloved. You say, I feel at home with them, because your unconscious recognizes its own reflection. But the home you feel is the home of exile, the old room where your unlived emotions waited. To love deeply is to summon the shadow. It is to say, come forth. What I have denied, show me what I could not see. The beloved becomes the vessel through which the hidden self demands recognition. And that, my friends, is why love hurts. Not because love is cruel, but because truth burns. The fire that consumes your illusions is the same fire that purifies your soul. Love exposes the ego's defenses. It tears down the walls you built for safety. You thought you wanted closeness, but what you really wanted was to be seen. And being seen means being vulnerable, being stripped of disguise. The ego calls this pain The soul calls it liberation. Every heartbreak, every disappointment is a small death of who you thought you were. And in those deaths, the self is born. When I studied the dreams of my patients, I saw again and again the same pattern. The dream begins with a scene of comfort, a house, a familiar room, a gentle face, and then something disturbs it. As Dranya enters, the walls collapse, the light changes. The dreamer awakens in fear, but the stranger in the dream is never a threat. It is the repressed aspect of the dreamer asking to come home. The psyche uses disturbance as language, what you call anxiety, it calls initiation. What you call loss, it calls transformation. So it is in your relationships. The moment of rupture, when the familiar turns painful, is the soul's invitation to see, but instead of seeing, we blame the other. We retreat or chase, repeat or resist. We cling to the fantasy of harmony, not realizing that harmony without truth is stagnation. The real union begins after the illusion collapses, when the veil of projection falls, when the other ceases to be your redeemer and becomes simply human. That is when love begins. For only then can two consciousnesses truly meet. You may wonder, why do we resist this seeing so fiercely? Because to see the truth is to renounce the comforting lie that someone else will complete us. The psyche does not want completion through another, it wants recognition through another. The true partner is not the one who fills your emptiness, but the one who illuminates it. To meet such a person is not romance, but revelation, and revelation is rarely gentle. It shakes you, disorients you, demands that you rebuild yourself from ashes. Yet if you stay present through it, you discover a peace that no external attachment can provide, the peace of being rooted in your own self. Think of the alchemical process. The material is first calcined, burned, reduced to ash. Then it is dissolved, separated, purified, and finally recombined into gold. So it is with the human soul. The old attachments must burn. The ego's false identifications must dissolve. Only then can the opposites unite, the masculine and feminine within, the conscious and unconscious, the pain and the wisdom. This is the alchemy of love. The familiar pain is the prima materia, the raw substance from which transformation begins. Without it, there would be no fire for the soul's awakening. I once wrote that every psychic process is accompanied by emotion. Emotion is not the enemy of reason. It is the voice of the unconscious. When you feel an intense pull toward someone, that electric recognition, that sense of destiny, do not interpret it only romantically. Ask instead, what part of me is awakening through this emotion? The feeling is a doorway. Step through it consciously. You may find not a soulmate, but a soul leçon. For some people come not to stay, but to reveal. They are the sacred messengers of your psyche. There is a certain melancholy in this truth. Yes, because it means that much of what you called love was actually longing the longing of the soul to return to itself. But this melancholy is holy. It softens you, it humbles you, it teaches you compassion first for yourself, then for others. When you can look at your past not with bitterness, but with gratitude, you know you have begun to individuate. You see that every rejection, every loss was not punishment, but initiation. The gods of the unconscious are stern teachers, but they are just. Let me tell you a story. A woman once came to me, tormented by her attraction to men who always abandoned her. She said, "Dr. Jung, it is as if I am cursed. Every time I love, they leave." I asked her to describe her dreams. Again and again, she dreamt of standing in a cold house, waiting for a father who never returned. In her waking life, she sought him in every lover. She mistook the ache of absence for the warmth of connection. This is not a curse. I told her, it is a pattern, and patterns can be transformed when they are made conscious. In time, she learned to sit with the waiting child within her, to hold her, to tell her, he is not coming, but I am here. Only then did she stop choosing those who vanished, because she had ceased to abandon herself. The moment you cease to abandon yourself, the world changes its face. The people you attract change. The texture of your love changes. You no longer crave the chaos that once felt like home. You begin to choose differently, not from need, but from recognition. You look at the calm heart and say, this feels strange, but good. And that strangeness is healing. That unfamiliar calm is the new home your soul has built. But beware, the ego will resist even this. It will whisper, this piece is dull, this person is boring, because the ego equates excitement with meaning. It does not yet understand that serenity is the highest form of ecstasy. The old self will try to recreate drama, to pull you back into the dance of pain, because it knows how to survive there. That is why vigilance is needed. Awareness must become your constant companion. When you feel the pull toward a familiar wound, pause, ask yourself, is this love or memory? And if it is memory, bow to it, thank it for its lesson, and let it pass. You must learn to love differently, not with the desperation of a child grasping for safety, but with the steady flame of a soul that knows its worth. This love does not consume, it illuminates. It does not demand, it reveals. It is no longer the repetition of pain, but the creation of meaning. In this love, the other is not a savior, but a fellow traveler. You walk side by side, each carrying your own light. This is what I call the sacred union, not the merging of two halves, but the meeting of two wholes. To reach this, you must befriend solitude. You must walk through the desert of aloneness until you find the oasis within. The modern world fears solitude, yet it is the birthplace of the soul. Only in aloneness can you hear the voice of the self. whispering beneath the noise of desire, solitude is not the absence of love, it is the preparation for it. It cleanses you of dependency, of projection, of illusion. It teaches you to be with your own depths without fleeing. When you can sit with your pain without needing it to end, you have become free. Freedom, however, is not detachment. It is participation without possession. It is the ability to love deeply without clinging, to give without losing oneself. The enlightened lover does not chain, nor does he flee. He stands at the center of his own being, offering his presence as a gift, not as a demand. This is what it means to transcend attachment, not to withdraw from feeling, but to feel with consciousness, to love without reenacting the past. And yet, the past never fully disappears. It becomes transmuted. The memories remain, but they become wisdom. The faces that once haunted you become symbols of your evolution. You can look at them and say, "You were my teacher." You can bless what once broke you, because you see its purpose. This is the highest form of reconciliation, when even the pain becomes sacred. Then the circle closes, and you no longer seek home outside yourself. You are home. When this happens, your dreams change. The abandoned house becomes inhabited again. The stranger becomes a friend. The darkness that once terrified you becomes luminous. You awaken in the dream and realize that the light was always within. The psyche no longer needs to send you lessons through pain. It begins to speak through intuition, through synchronicity, through peace. You move through life with a quiet certainty that everything unfolding before you is not random, but symbolic. Every encounter becomes meaningful. Every emotion becomes material for the soul's work. This is what it means to live symbolically, to see with the eye of the heart. And so, my friends, I tell you, the journey of the soul is not from pain to pleasure, but from unconscious repetition to conscious creation. You will replay the familiar pain until you recognize it as your own creation. Once you do, the pattern dissolves, and in its place arises something astonishingly simple: presence. To live in presence is to no longer chase, to no longer flee. It is to let life reveal itself moment by moment without defense. Then love is no longer an escape from loneliness, but an expression of wholeness. And that, I believe, is the true purpose of all our suffering, to bring us home to the wholeness we forgot. The individual, you see, never suffers alone. The pain that lives in you is rarely born with you. It is ancient. It is inherited. It is the echo of forgotten generations whispering through your blood. When you replay familiar pain, you are not only living your own story, you are continuing the story of your lineage. The unconscious carries memory deeper than the mind can imagine. We are haunted not only by our own past, but by the unlived lives of our ancestors. You think it is your heartbreak that destroys you, but perhaps it is your grandmother's unwept tears, perhaps your father's silence, lives in your throat. Perhaps your mother's despair echoes in your longing for love. The unconscious is timeless. It carries within it the ghosts of those who came before, what they could not resolve. You will feel as compulsion. What they repressed becomes your inheritance. And so, when you fall into the same familiar pain, you are performing an ancient ritual, the repetition of a wound that has waited centuries to be healed. This is why your suffering matters. When you bring awareness to it, you redeem not only yourself, but all those whose pain you carry. To make the unconscious conscious is to break the ancestral spell. You become the alchemist of your bloodline, turning the lead of repetition into the gold of awareness. This is why individuation is not a selfish pursuit. It is sacred work for humanity. Every soul that awakens lightens the burden of the collective shadow. Consider how patterns repeat through families. The mother who loves too much gives birth to the daughter who loves too little. The father who abandons creates the son who cannot stay. Generations dance around the same fire, each mistaking the smoke for destiny, until one day someone stops, someone feels the pain fully, refuses to pass it forward, and turns it into understanding. That one becomes the bridge between past and future. That one becomes conscious. I have often said that what we do not make conscious appears in our lives as fate, but fate is simply the unconscious demanding recognition. When you find yourself saying, "Why does this always happen to me?" understand that it is not punishment, it is memory. The psyche is not linear, it is circular. It returns to the same point again and again until you see the whole pattern. And when you see it, you step outside the circle. That is freedom, not the absence of pain, but the presence of meaning. The modern mind resists this idea. It wants progress, not return. But the psyche speaks in cycles, in spirals. It repeats because repetition deepens consciousness. Each time the wound reappears, you meet it with a slightly larger awareness. You think you have regressed, but in truth, you are seeing the same landscape from a higher hill. And as your vision expands, compassion arises not only for yourself, but for all who have walked this path of longing. When you truly see the pattern, you no longer hate those who hurt you. You understand that they, too, were repeating familiar pain. They could not give what they never received. Their cruelty, their absence, their fear, all of it was inheritance. You begin to perceive the tragic beauty of it all, how the unconscious binds us until consciousness sets us free. Then forgiveness is no longer moral, but natural. It flows not from will, but from understanding. You forgive because you see, and seeing is the beginning of healing. You might wonder why the unconscious uses pain as its teacher. Why not joy? Why not peace? Because pain is the only experience the ego cannot easily ignore. Pleasure reinforces the known. Pain disrupts it. Pain cracks the shell of the personality and lets the deeper self speak. It is the call of the soul saying, "Wake up. There is more to you than this story." If you answer that call, the pain becomes sacred. If you resist, it becomes suffering. The difference is awareness. The mystics understood this. They spoke of the dark night of the soul as a necessary passage. The light cannot enter a closed system. The ego must break. So the psyche, with its infinite wisdom, orchestrates experiences that humble us. The familiar pain becomes the crucible in which identity dissolves, and when identity dissolves, the self emerges vast, timeless, whole. You discover that beneath your personal story runs a current of universal experience. What you call your pain is the world's pain moving through you, asking for consciousness. It is at this stage that dreams often change. The house that once collapsed now reveals a basement you never knew existed. The ocean that once threatened to drown you now invites you to swim. These are symbols of integration, the unconscious opening its gates, allowing you to explore what was once forbidden. The more you enter those depths consciously, the less they haunt you unconsciously. The monsters become guides, the shadows become teachers. You begin to live in dialogue with your own soul. This inner dialogue is what I call the process of individuation, the reconciliation of opposites. Within, it is not the destruction of pain, but its transformation. The child within learns to meet the parent within. The masculine learns to embrace the feminine. The conscious learns to honor the unconscious. When these opposites meet, something new is born, not compromise, but synthesis. This is the self, the divine center that has always been there, waiting to be recognized. But let us not romanticize this process. It is not gentle. To meet your shadow is to meet everything you have despised. Denied or feared, it is to feel rage, envy, grief, and lust in their raw forms, not to act on them, but to integrate them. Integration means ownership. You say, yes, this darkness is also me. And in that acknowledgement, it loses its power to possess you. The demon becomes an angel. Once it is named, the shadow, embraced, becomes strength. When you have done this inner work, your relationships change profoundly. You no longer need the other to carry your disowned parts. You no longer demand that they heal what you refuse to face. You meet them as an equal soul, not as a rescuer or victim. Love becomes partnership, not projection. You can stand in presence, neither grasping nor retreating. And that, my friends, is freedom within intimacy, to love with open eyes. This kind of love is rare because it requires maturity. It is not the intoxicating fire of projection, but the steady flame of awareness. It demands that you hold space for contradiction, that you can love someone and see their flaws, that you can stay open even when afraid. It asks that you live without the illusion of control, for love is not possession, it is participation in the mystery of another soul. You do not master it, you surrender to it consciously, and in that surrender you grow. Still, The familiar pain may whisper again from time to time. It may say, "You are unworthy," or "You will be left again." Do not fight it. Sit with it. Listen to its story. Ask, what do you need now? Most often, it needs only to be held, the psyche, like a child, heals through attention. Neglect perpetuates pain. Awareness dissolves it. This is why we must cultivate tenderness toward our own suffering. The way you speak to yourself becomes the template for every relationship you will have. I once asked a patient to write a letter to their pain as if it were a friend. They wrote, "I have hated you, blamed you, run from you, but you were only trying to show me where I had forgotten myself." When they read it aloud, they wept. That was the moment of transformation. Not because the pain vanished, but because it was finally seen. Pain is not the enemy. Denial is. Once the pain is acknowledged, it no longer needs to repeat. It has fulfilled its purpose. The repetition of familiar pain then is not a flaw of the psyche. It is its method. It teaches through experience what the intellect cannot grasp. You may read 1,000 books on healing, yet until you live through the same heartbreak consciously, nothing truly changes. Knowledge becomes wisdom only when it passes through the heart. That is why life brings us the same lesson in different forms, not to punish, but to complete our understanding. You might say, "But how do I know when the lesson is complete?" You will know because the same situation will arise, and you will respond differently. You will feel the old trigger, but you will not act from it. You will pause. You will breathe. You will choose love over compulsion. That is the sign that the unconscious has become conscious. You are no longer the puppet of your past. You are the author of your present. And that, perhaps, is the greatest freedom a human being can achieve. Yet freedom is not an escape from human experience. Even the most conscious soul will still feel longing, sorrow, loneliness, but these emotions will no longer enslave you. They will enrich you. You will see beauty even in your sadness, because you will know it as the pulse of life itself. Conscious suffering is not misery. It is participation in the depth of existence. To feel deeply is to be alive. To suffer consciously is to grow divine. And when you have lived long enough, you will look back and realize that every person who wounded you was an angel in disguise. Every heartbreak was an initiation. Every loss was a teacher. The familiar pain was the path itself. Without it, you would never have sought awakening. The soul is wise beyond measure. It uses even suffering as a tool for wholeness. Once you see that, gratitude replaces resentment. You thank the pain for showing you home, because in the end, that is where all this leads home, not the home of childhood, not the home of another's arms, but the home within yourself, the place where you no longer chase, because you are whole, the place where love flows naturally, because there is no division left inside you, you return to the center, calm, aware, complete. The world remains the same, yet everything feels different, because you no longer look at it through the eyes of pain, but through the eyes of soul. There is a paradox at the heart of healing. That which wounded you becomes the very gate through which you awaken. You spend years running from the pain, building defenses, constructing explanations, yet all the while the pain waits patiently. It does not chase you, it does not fade. It waits like a silent teacher, knowing that one day you will tire of running and finally turn around. And when you do, when you look directly into its eyes, you realize that it was never your enemy. It was your initiation. The wound is a place where the light enters you, not because light seeks suffering, but because the broken place is the only space large enough to receive it. Pain criat dept. Without pain, consciousness remains shallow. Bound to surface comforts, the wound opens a vertical axis within the soul, connecting you downward to your shadow and upward to the divine. When you allow yourself to descend into your pain fully, without resistance, you find that at its core lies something radiant, the living presence of the self. This is what I have called the archetype of the wounded healer. The healer is not someone who is free from pain, but one who has descended into it and returned with wisdom. Jung, the immortal centaur, could not heal his own wound. Yet, through that wound, he learned the mysteries of medicine. So it is with us. Our wounds make us human. Our consciousness of them makes us divine. We are not called to eliminate pain, but to transform our relationship with it. Pain becomes sacred when it is no longer resisted. When you stop resisting, you enter the mystery of transmutation. What was once suffering becomes power. The familiar pain that once enslaved you becomes the gold of awareness. It is as if the psyche says, now you are ready. You can hold the fire without being burned. And so, the same emotion that once consumed you becomes creative force. The grief that once drowned you becomes compassion. The rage that once destroyed becomes courage. The longing that once enslaved becomes prayer. The alchemy of the soul is the conversion of pain into presence. But you cannot reach this by intellect alone. The modern mind believes it can think its way out of suffering. It reads, it analyzes, it explains, yet the pain remains, because pain is not cured by reason, it is healed by relationship. You must enter into relationship with your own darkness. Sit beside it, listen to it, speak to it as you would to a friend. When you do, the darkness softens. The unloved parts of you begin to trust your presence. Slowly, the psyche reweaves itself. The fracture becomes a seam of gold, like the Japanese art of kintsugi, where broken pottery is mended with gold, more beautiful for having been broken. This is the meaning of individuation, to become whole, not perfect, to accept that wholeness includes the shadow, the imperfection, the wound, When you integrate your darkness, you stop projecting it onto others. You no longer demand that the world carry your rejected parts. You stop blaming your lover for your loneliness, your parents for your fear, your fate for your patterns. You see that all along these were mirrors. You become responsible not in the moral sense, but in the psychological sense. You begin to respond rather than react. You begin to create rather than repeat. Creation is the natural expression of the healed soul when the energy once bound in pain is liberated. It seeks to build. This is why so many artists, mystics, and thinkers create from their suffering. They turn the raw matter of pain into form, into beauty, into meaning. The creative act is the outward expression of inner transformation. It is the psyche saying, I have transmuted my wound into light, now I offer it to the world. This is not performance, but offering. It is how the individual contributes to the healing of the collective. You see, the collective unconscious, that vast sea of archetypal energy, is shaped by each individual soul. Every time one person integrates their pain consciously, a ripple of healing moves through the whole. Every time you choose awareness over repetition, you redeem not only yourself, but a fragment of humanity's shadow. The familiar pain you carried was never just yours. It was part of a collective inheritance of fear, shame, and longing. By bringing it to light, you help to purify the field. This is what I mean when I say the personal is the gateway to the universal. The ancients expressed this truth through myth. In the legend of the Fisher King, the land becomes barren because the king is wounded. The wound in the ruler mirrors the wound in the realm. It is only when the wound is acknowledged, when the knight asks, what ails thee, that the land begins to heal. So it is with us. When we ask our own hearts, what ails thee, we begin to restore fertility to the inner kingdom. The health of the world depends on the consciousness of the individual. That is why healing is a sacred duty, but the ego does not easily surrender to this process. It clings to its narratives, to its illusions of control. It says, I am done with pain, even as it recreates it. It wants resolution without transformation, comfort without awareness. Yet the psyche is patient. It will wait until the moment of exhaustion when the ego's defenses crumble and you fall to your knees. Only then, in that humility, can grace enter the self which has been waiting in silence, steps forward. It does not speak in words, but in stillness. It fills you with a quiet certainty that everything you sought was always within. In that moment, the search ends, the longing for familiar pain fades, not because the world has changed, but because your perception has. You no longer seek intensity to feel alive. You are alive. You no longer chase love to escape yourself. You are love. This realization is not dramatic. It is serene. It arrives like dawn breaking after a long night, soft, inevitable, luminous. You feel peace not as an absence of pain, but as a presence that holds all pain tenderly. That is what it means to come home, and yet the journey does not end there. Wholeness is not a static state, but a living rhythm. You will continue to meet new challenges, new relationships, new losses, but they will no longer shatter you. You will move through them with the awareness that life is not against you. It is unfolding through you. You will see meaning even in chaos. You will understand that each encounter, each emotion, each event is another step in the eternal dance between the conscious and the unconscious. You will no longer fear the dark because you have become intimate with it. You will carry your light into it. When I speak of the self, I speak of the divine within, not a God outside, but a presence at the center of being. The self is the axis around which the opposites revolve. It is the still point in the turning world. When you align with it, you no longer oscillate between attachment and avoidance, hope and despair. You live from the center. You become the witness to your own drama. You watch the waves of emotion rise and fall without losing yourself in them. This is not detachment. It is participation with awareness. You become both actor and observer, human and divine. At this stage, love itself changes character. It ceases to be an emotion and becomes a state of consciousness. You love not because someone pleases you, but because love is your natural expression. You see yourself in all beings, even in those who are lost in their own repetitions. You recognize their pain as the same familiar pain you once carried. You no longer judge, you bless. Compassion replaces analysis. The heart becomes the true organ of perception. And so, when you encounter another who is still trapped in the cycle, who confuses pain with love, intensity with connection, you do not try to save them. You hold space. You allow them to find their own mirror. You understand that each soul awakens in its own time. You trust the wisdom of their path, for the psyche is infinitely intelligent. It knows exactly when to reveal, when to conceal, when to repeat, when to release. All you can do is remain conscious, and through your presence, become a beacon. That is the role of the awakened one, not to preach, but to embody. The light you carry speaks more powerfully than words. When others feel your peace, something ancient within them stirs. They may not understand it, but they recognize it. It is the same light that lies dormant in them, waiting to awaken. In this way, healing becomes contagious, not through conversion, but through resonance. The healed soul radiates wholeness, and wholeness calls forth wholeness in others. You see now that what you called familiar pain was not a curse, but a compass. It pointed you toward the parts of yourself you had forgotten. It led you through the labyrinth of your own unconscious until you found the center. It was your soul's way of guiding you home. Without it, you might never have sought the depth. You would have remained on the surface, calling survival life. But life is not meant to be survived. It is meant to be realized. Pain and love, loss, joy, all are vehicles of realization. The psyche uses whatever it must to awaken you, and when you awaken, you no longer ask, "Why did this happen to me?" You ask, "What is life showing me through this?" Every experience becomes sacred. Even suffering becomes sacred because it serves consciousness. The familiar pain becomes a teacher you bow to in gratitude before you let it go. You say, "Thank you for bringing me here. Thank you for teaching me who I am." And as you speak those words, you feel the circle close. The repetition ends. What once felt like home no longer does, because you have built a new home within. Perhaps that is the quiet miracle of the psyche. It does not seek happiness, but wholeness. And wholeness, though it includes pain, is peace. When you reach this place, you will look back and realize that you were never truly lost. Every detour, every heartbreak, every familiar ache was part of the map. The soul never wastes an experience. It weaves even your tears into wisdom. It leads you step by step from attachment to awareness, from illusion to truth, from exile to return. So I tell you now, my friends, when the next familiar pain arises, do not flee. Sit with it. Speak to it. Ask what it has come to teach you, and listen not with your mind, but with your heart, for the heart understands the language of the unconscious. It knows that every ache conceals a message, every repetition hides a revelation. And when you finally understand, you will smile not in triumph, but in tenderness, because you will see that it was never attachment at all. It was love disguised as pain, calling you home, and home, you will discover, was never a place, nor a person, nor a memory. It was you. It was always you